Republic Hive World, TOI 700D 101.4 light-years from Earth, May 28, 2176 AD. Owen watched excitedly as the drones responded to the artificial pheromones for the 10th time in a row, and he clapped Dr. Chui on the shoulder, who turned around and gave Owen a crushing bear hug. "I think we finally did it, Owen," he yelled enthusiastically into Owen's ear, causing him to wince. Owen responded with his own victory yell as they separated from each other before looking back at the drone formation perfectly executing the maneuvers. For months, a team of Republic scientists had been working on trying to fabricate artificial pheromones and scent markers that would allow for basic control of worker drones without any input from command drones or queens. When Owen and Emily arrived, Owen asked to be part of the efforts and threw himself into the experiment, rapidly becoming the de facto leader of the effort as his zeal and out-of-the-box thinking helped the team get over the many hurdles preventing them from successfully controlling the drones. It was Owen who suggested pivoting from individual control to mass control. "We will never be able to direct a single drone to install a single component of an engine or to perform an individual task. We need to focus on capitalizing on their hive tendencies and focus on large formations." Now, after 4 months of testing and thousands of pheromone permutations, they had finally multiple drone formations to execute maneuvers and perform joint tasks. The real success was the AI command drones the Republic built and sent to them after input from Bandit and Aurora. The AI command drones looked just like command drones, had sacks of pheromones inside of them, and by a combination of pheromones and visual signals seen by the other drones, they were able to control hundreds and thousands of drones at a time. The last 10 tests verified the results, and Owen sent the final command to the AI drones leading the formations to release attack pheromones and assault a network of enemy trenches in the distance. This was the final test, and both Owen and Dr. Chui nervously stared at the multiple screens as the AI drones within the 10,000-strong formations took control and charged at the trenches. Instead of the mass suicide attacks that were seen by the drones during the reconquest of the Dead Worlds, these drones were following the examples of the AI drones and utilizing cover and fire suppression tactics as they pinned down targets and flanked them. The hope was for Republic ground commanders to be able to exercise a basic level of control over the Allied drones when it came time to fight ground campaigns. Instead of callously throwing the lives of thousands of drones away in massed wave attacks, they could now be used intelligently in combat formations, without relying on only queens and command drones for control and direction. Aurora and Luna had taught the drones how to respond to the casualty bands around their legs and bodies, and the drones would react to signals from the casualty bands as they were tagged by the harmless lasers of the OP-4. Just like the laser tag games he used to play as a kid, the drones would interpret the signals and respond appropriately to the severity of their simulated injuries. Hits to the thorax or the abdomen were crippling, and the tagged drones would lay on the ground and play dead. Drones would stop using legs that were tagged, using the remaining ones to continue advancing depending on the extent of their injuries. Something Owen was truly proud of was the implementation of Emily's proposal for medic/corpsman drones. Hundreds of drones were taught the basic triage skills necessary to treat their own unique physiologies by Aurora and the command drones, after Emily shared her idea with Aurora and showed her human examples. Aurora was stunned by the concept of humans willingly putting themselves in harm's way to save others who were wounded, and she became personally involved in the training program, fascinated by the potential of saving drones that would have died from untreated wounds before. The concept greatly affected Aurora, causing her to withdraw and disappear for almost 2 days, as she became racked with guilt from the thousands of years of callous disregard for the drones' welfare on numerous battlefields. It just never occurred to them to consider trying to rescue and save drones that were left on the battlefields, as they were always considered an expendable and easily replaced resource. What really shamed Aurora was the level of care and support that Republic personnel received after being wounded in battle, sometimes for the rest of their lives. It was Aurora's first introduction to the human concept of social welfare for the disabled and afflicted. Finally, After almost 2 days of isolation, Aurora emerged from her private chambers and dedicated herself to the efforts. She reviewed hundreds of hours of Republic video footage of battlefield triage going back over 300 years of human warfare. She was able to process the footage at incredible speeds, her biological supercomputer mind capable of viewing the footage at almost 20 times the normal human visual processing limit. Afterwards, she studied human triage and medical procedures at the same remarkable rate, designing treatments that were uniquely designed for insectoid physiology. 10 command drones were taught by Aurora herself, and they passed the knowledge to their other sister command drones before training the medic drones. It was an incredible success, and Owen smiled widely as dozens of medic drones crawled to the pretend casualties and started triage procedures and treatment from specialized supplies within the sacks attached to their exoskeletons. I wish Emily was here. She would love to see this herself, Owen thought as he continued to monitor the assault from the camera feeds transmitted by dozens of Overwatch drones. After a few more minutes, the exercise came to an end as the assault formations captured the last of the trench network and achieved victory with only a 7% casualty rate, far less than the acceptable threshold of 15% as outlined by the Republic war planners. The formations became more efficient in achieving their tactical objectives and reducing their casualties every single time the exercises were run. They got better at it every time, and fewer drones were being tagged as they became used to the assault tactics. They are learning far faster than we estimated, he thought to himself as he watched the drones begin to fortify the trench network, preparing to defend themselves from potential counterattacks without being ordered to do so by the AI command drones. He had seen numerous signs of planning and intelligence from individual worker drones that would assume a command role and continue leading their fellow drones when certain command AI drones were deactivated. The purpose of deactivating them was to see what the drones would do after the sudden loss of the pheromones and visual signal commands from the AI drones. Surprisingly, the affected drone formations seemed to have their own way of producing a command worker drone to lead them from among their own ranks and continue the assaults once they determined they were no longer being controlled. This should not have been possible according to all that was known and verified about the way the hive mind worked, but the evidence was irrefutable in Owen's eyes. This needed to be discussed with Emily, and if she agreed, they would then show Aurora. He had been out here for over 2 weeks, and now he could finally go back home to his family. He inhaled the cool, crisp air of the sparsely vegetated plains they were in, imagining the smell of lilac in Emily's hair and Ito's baby scent as he held them within his arms. Queen World of the Insectoid Empire, brood chamber of the Hive Mother, 4th cycle, 384.76 years, Insectoid solar calendar, May 29, 2176 AD. The Hive Mother waited impatiently as Bandit Friend continued to unfurl the strange, flexible device on the floor in front of her. So many new concepts had been taught to her by the yellow-eyed machine animal, and her need to know more only increased as they continued to share thoughts. It became an almost insatiable desire that consumed both her waking and dormant thoughts. And Bandit Friend seemed to be an inexhaustible well of knowledge and wisdom, reminding her of the ancestors that dwelled within her. She had absorbed the animal concepts of their version of mathematics, their social behaviors, and how they defined themselves through shared genetic heritage. Names fascinated her, and she was jealous of her sister being gifted the name of one of their most powerful and revered ancestors. She must have one herself, she decided. She will share thoughts with her sister and ask her advice on the matter. It would not do for the Hive Mother to not have a name when her sister had been honored so by the animals. She was particularly interested in their concepts of rightness and wrongness, and their strange beliefs in all-powerful ancestors that would take them to specially created hives when they died, where they would live for eternity in happiness and love if they lived a life of rightness. The other place, the hive of punishment and eternal suffering for those who lived a life filled with wrongness, terrified her, and she became fearful that such a fate could be possible for queens and hive mothers who lived lives filled with wrongness. She never knew the animals were such fascinating creatures, and she suffered frequent bouts of despondency as she came to terms with the many unique animal civilizations that were now gone forever because of their swarms. The cleverness of the animals amazed her, and many times she found herself regretting becoming a hive mother. The walls of the brood chamber have now turned her into a hostage and denied her the ability to experience the new places and concepts she had learned from Bandit Friend. She told Bandit Friend this during their last sharing of thoughts, revealing her sadness openly to him as she told him of her deep regret for never being able to experience such new things. He asked for permission to bring her a gift from the cruiser, promising her this new concept would bring her joy despite being a hostage for the rest of her life. She granted it and demanded he bring her this new gift immediately. It took him 4 solar hours, and she found herself becoming increasingly impatient as she waited for what seemed like an eternity. Now he finally was here, and he finished flattening out the strange gift on the stone ground. Seating himself on the ground and intertwining his 2 legs, he began signing to her as he explained the concept of the gift. It took her time to grasp his thoughts, though she felt like she had only the barest comprehension of what he was trying to explain to her. The gift was black, with many individual white pieces that had smaller black pieces embedded within them. Bandit Friend began to move his claws over the white pieces, and the gift made noises that echoed off the brood chamber walls. She listened to the strange sounds intently, and within moments, she found herself becoming entranced by it. Her mind expanded beyond the brood chamber, and she became disconnected from the hive as her spirit untethered itself and drifted freely. She was in many places at once, her essence resonating with the strange sounds as it caused her to experience many emotions. She became boundless, the sounds giving her a freedom she had never known before in her life. As she floated in the strange realm the sounds took her to, she realized they had a mathematical component to them, and parts of her mind became hyperactivated as she assigned numerical values to the sounds. For what seemed like an eternity, she drifted in the endless domain as her spirit felt the emotions the sounds were creating in her. Happiness, sadness, grief, joy, regret, love, hate, and countless others washed over her essence. She suddenly felt herself hurtling through a black void devoid of meaning before returning to her body in the brood chamber. She felt small and insignificant within the constraints of her physical body, and a deep sadness came over her as she eyed Bandit Friend. Within her she felt her ancestors lamenting the end of the sounds, clamoring to experience them again. A myriad of emotions came from them. They were as deeply affected by the sounds as she was, and they wanted more. Bandit Friend, I have never known such as these sounds made me feel. I am deeply saddened to find myself back here. I thank you for bringing me to such a place, and I desire to hear the same sounds and go there again. It is terrible that there are no other sounds like this one to explore. The machine animal shared thoughts with her, telling her the name of the sounds, Moonlight Sonata. He then shared more thoughts with her. Hive Mother, this was but one song. There are many more songs I could play for you from many different animal worlds. Joy surged within her at the thoughts of Bandit Friend. She must know how many of these sounds there were. How many, Bandit Friend? Billions, Hive Mother. There are billions of songs with billions of permutations. Every solar day, thousands of new ones are created by the animals. Sheer joy sprang up from inside of her, both her own and the happiness of the Hive Mothers and Queens within her. Daughter, we need more. We have never felt such as this. And all we know is this new sadness of silence now the sounds have gone away. Please, daughter, or ours, do this for us. Make more sounds for us, Bandit Friend. Please do this for me and my ancestors within me. Bandit Friend turned his yellow eyes down to the soundmaker and began to press his claws against the white pieces. Soon the Hive Mother was borne away again, drifting in the realm of joy and freedom. Fast Battleship Group 01A. Task Force Extricate. 6,316 light-years from Earth. May 28, 2176 AD. The task force flashed out behind the first gas giant, and Command Unit 273 ordered silent running protocols to be enacted. It received confirmation pulses from its companion AIs and ran passive scans to verify the results. There were no sensor returns, and 273 confirmed with its companions that the protocols had been successful before turning its attention to the android and connecting to it. I need confirmation of the insectoid presence in this system before proceeding. The android began communicating with the insectoid next to it, and the android soon responded to 273's command for confirmation. They are here, Command Unit 273. The command drone cannot isolate their general location or determine their number due to the primary's current solar maximum phase. The increased emissions and flare activity are most likely why the survivors have chosen to hide here. I concur with your assessment as 317. How does the command drone wish to proceed? The command drone wishes to try to reach out with her mind and communicate with them. She is waiting for your approval before doing so. I find their ability for superluminal communication fascinating, as 317. Tell her to proceed, and I want you to translate her communication attempts to me in real time. As you wish, Command Unit 273. As 317 turned back to the insectoid, and 273 set all the interior scanning instruments to maximum as it tried to detect the insectoid's communication attempts, there was a massive spike registered by the electroencephalographic scanners, but there were no other signs of signals or emissions that could be detected except for the spike emanating from the command drone. The Republic was capable of superluminal communication utilizing a null-space communications relay system, but the power requirements were enormous, and the system was extremely expensive to maintain and operate. As a result, the use of the null-space relay system was reserved for only official government communications and emergency transmissions. Distance was also a factor in the expense, the power requirements exponentially increasing for every additional parsec after 127 light-years. Null-space military comm drones were sufficient for most communications, the small drones being able to transit null space up to 50 times the speed of the fastest Republic warship null drives due to their smaller mass and the absence of biologicals. The transit time and distance of 20 days for the fastest Republic warship crewed by null space veterans could be achieved in 14 hours, 43 minutes by emergency military comm drones, 37 hours, 16 minutes by standard military comm drones, and 107 hours, 37 minutes by the fastest Republic civilian comm drone models. 273 marveled at the insectoid ability for instantaneous communication with each other over vast distances, though only hive mothers were able to extend their range limit using the strange focusers they create. Command drones like the one 273 was watching now could engage in instant telepathic communication with another command drone within a range of 5 billion kilometers, and Queens had almost double the range of command drones. Worker drones were able to receive thoughts within the range limits of the command drones in Queens, but their own projection ranges were limited to a mere 500,000 kilometers. 273 focused its attention on the communication being sent by AS-317. The command drone has contacted the survivors within the system. Your hypothesis was correct. They are indeed heading to the fallback position you calculated. The command drone wants your permission to have them come to us so we may protect them. How many ships as 317? Why did they choose to stop their journey and hide here? 4 hive ships and 46 cruisers, Command Unit 273. They're heavily damaged, and they were being pursued by a large Balrican formation of 137 warships. The command drone leading this group did not want to lead the enemy to the fallback position and endanger any other survivors. How many surviving ships in total are trying to reach the fallback position? The command drone's last count before they split up was just over 3 to the power of 6, according to her. 62 hive ships and 694 cruisers are all that remain of the Guardian fleets. They are to remain here and effect what repairs they can. As 317, we will continue searching for the others and bring them here to join them, and then we will escort the... Alert sounded in the control center, and 273 focused all its attention on the source of the warnings from the Sentry drone network monitoring the outer system. 273 had deployed them when they first arrived, and it compiled all the scanning results that came from the 3 drones that had flashed out next to the task force. The source was 3 formations of enemy warships that had flashed out of null space, and they had arrived 4 minutes ago. 2 formations were 845,356,082 kilometers from the primary. while the third formation was much further out, along the inner boundary of the system's Kuiper belt. The light from the warships would not reach the current position of the task force for another 33 minutes and 12 seconds, which means the enemy would not receive the light of the task force until 32 minutes from now. 273 decided to take advantage of the element of surprise and issued command pulses to the task force, while simultaneously telling AS-317 to order the command drone to enter the acceleration chamber, nestled deep within the ship. The same order was transmitted to the other 7 ships of the task force with biologicals on board before 273 selected an attack pattern from its wargaming scenario lists and transmitted it to the others. Initiate attack pattern Theta 3B, Squadron 1 and 3, target enemy formation at coordinates 227, Mark 187.26, Squadron 2 and 4, target enemy formation at 267.2, Mark 117.34, execute in 2 minutes 20 seconds. 273 received confirmation pulses from its companion AIs as the task force broke into 3 squadrons of 4 fast battleships each and activated their shields and weapons systems. The remaining 3 fast battleships would join 273 when they flashed into null space. 273 felt its armored hatches sliding to the side as the new kinetic weapon systems emerged, along with the quad-particle accelerator turrets and point defense systems. It strongly felt the desire to engage in combat and destroy the enemy, hunting down the few remaining insectoid survivors of the Guardian fleets. The countdown reached 0, and 273 felt its neural pathways surging with anticipation as they flashed into null space. 6 seconds later, 273 and the other 7 fast battleships of the 2 formations it was leading flashed out, attacking along both the Z-axis and Y-axis relative to the enemy position. Squadrons 1 and 3 initiated the same pattern, their attack run an inverse of Squadrons 2 and 4. The 16 ships of Task Force Extricate charged through the enemy force at 0.002% light speed, their war beams slicing through the unprepared enemy ships as they surged through them at 2,158,505.6976 kilometers per h. Their time passing through the enemy measured in milliseconds. The 4 squadrons blitzed through the large enemy formation and flashed out into null space, remerging above and below the enemy force relative to the plane of the ecliptic, 1.238 seconds later. This time they were accelerating at a mere 127,000 kilometers per h after projecting a dampening field in front of them as they transitioned through the threshold from null space to normal space and arrested their momentum. The biologicals aboard the enemy ships still had not processed what just happened as the 4 squadrons passed through them again, now firing their new kinetic weapons systems and upgraded triple bolts as they penetrated the formation. Hundreds of the new fragmentation railgun slugs were fired as they passed their targets at what seemed like a crawl to 273 and its companion AIs. The FRS rounds detonated right before hitting their targets, turning into giant shotgun blasts that entirely vaporized the smaller ships. The larger cruisers and battleships of the enemy had entire bow and aft sections disappear as they evaporated under the onslaught. Targets that had been hit amidship suddenly became just bow and aft sections that were no longer part of a whole. 273 selected a target, an enemy battleship that had yet to be hit, and sent a single volley of upgraded triple bolts towards it. The torpedoes shot out from their tubes, and 273 waited with anticipation to see the results as they neared their target and converted to plasma. The upgraded bolts had enhanced warheads and a new system created by Republic military researchers after the technology transfers initiated by President Sarix of the Neo-Commonwealth. Commonwealth weapons researchers successfully miniaturized single-use null-space capacitors, but their versions would self-destruct as soon as they tried to flash back out of null space. Republic scientists, with help from the Elite, finally succeeded in perfecting the system and bringing the concept to fruition. The result was a plasma torpedo system that had miniaturized null space capacitors installed inside the warheads. They were fired normally and would reach their maximum velocity before converting themselves into plasma warheads. Instead of having to breach hulls, the new weapon systems would flash into null space and then flash back out inside the targeted ships, bypassing the armor plating in both the outer and inner hulls. Emerging from null space with their previous velocity, the weapons would now tunnel through the internal compartments as they smashed through bulkheads and entire decks before finally detonating their enhanced warheads. The triple bolts 273 had fired suddenly disappeared, the balls of shimmering plasma no longer in real space as they flashed out. The targeted battleship suddenly lost power, the internal lights flickering before the entire ship went dark. The massive vessel seemed to buck before it erupted from the inside out, breaking into 3 large pieces that spewed gases and flash-frozen fluids as thousands of small objects were ejected. 273 barely had time to register that the objects were biologicals before the enemy reactors went critical and the 3 large pieces were vaporized. 273 marveled at the results as it processed the time it took to destroy an entire enemy battleship. 3.683 seconds from time of firing to destruction. The task force only had 2 volleys of the triple shots per ship, and 273 selected and targeted another nearby battleship as it sent a command pulse to the others to only use the new weapon system on undamaged enemy battleships. By this time, the enemy finally started reacting to their attack, and 273 felt energy weapons impacting on the shields protecting it. It did not feel actual pain, just an awareness of where the enemy weapons were hitting it. The enemy was in complete disarray from the sudden unexpected attack as the tight formation fell apart, several enemy ships colliding as they panicked and initiated uncoordinated evasive maneuvers. 273 fired its last volley of upgraded triple shot at the battleship it was targeting and maneuvered to target a trio of cruisers along its axis of attack as it increased power to the engines to close the distance between them. 4.1 seconds later, a second battleship broke apart as 273 started firing its main weapons, the 4-bow quad turrets all slamming into the middle of the targeted cruiser and breaking the ship into 2 as the spinal mount was severed. Shields flaring a dark red as dozens of enemy beams hit them in concentrated volleys. 273 continued firing its railguns and war beams at targets of opportunity all around the fast battleship as its bow turrets fired again, shearing off the entire aft section of the second cruiser it was targeting. 273 surged past it, sending a volley of anti-ship torpedoes and standard triple shots out of its aft tubes towards the third cruiser as it finally exited the enemy formation and reached empty space. 273 flashed into null space and remained there, waiting for the others to join it as its shield emitters recharged themselves. 16 seconds later, the entire task force was now in null space and reforming themselves into a diamond formation as 273 ran a battle damage assessment. Of the 34 enemy ships in the formation they attacked, 27 had been destroyed, and the remaining 7 ships were lifeless hulks with no power emissions or life sign readings. There was only minimal damage to 3 of the fast battleships, where concentrated volleys from the enemy had caused shield quadrants to fail, but the ablative armor did its job and prevented any serious damage to the vessels. Sending command pulses to the rest of the task force, 273 entered null space to assault the second formation 78 million kilometers away. This time, the enemy knew they were under attack as the light from the first battle had reached them, and they were ready for an assault. 273 planned for that, and he had the 4 squadrons flash in and out all around the formation and launch their standard triple bolts, railgun slugs, and anti-ship torpedoes in a rolling barrage as a single squadron would flash out, fire their weapons, and then flash back into null space. The next squadron, then the next, then the next, continued the attack pattern, flashing out at different points around the formation as the others would emerge at a different location. The enemy formation was unable to deal with the random attack pattern and disintegrated. Detecting distress calls from the surviving enemy vessels, 273 flooded the area with jamming signals, the other AIs adding their own jamming frequencies as the remaining 23 enemy ships fired wildly all around them. 273 noticed one of the AIs fighting more aggressively than usual and detected an anomalous signal coming from 246. 273 focused its receivers on the signals emanating from 246, curious about the dual jamming frequencies. There was another signal piggybacking the jamming frequency, and 273 isolated the frequency as it executed evasive maneuvers to dodge the weapons fire from a cluster of ships in front of it. It was discordant sounds with a repeating beat, and 273 analyzed it, comparing it to the databanks at its disposal. It quickly found a match and accessed the files. It was a song from an ancient human video game called Doom and was labeled Gladiator Theme. Intrigued, it activated the file and played it in the control center. The song came over the speaker system, and 273 analyzed it while connecting to 246 and asking it to explain its actions. 246 responded, informing 273 of its research into how human music can increase their aggression index. It sent over files of its research, and 273 scanned them. 246 requested 273 to join in its research and to activate the emotion chip. 273 did so, and within milliseconds, the strange discordant sounds of the song caused it to undergo an emotional response. 273's desire to destroy the enemy seemed to be magnified, and an overwhelming urge to ram the nearest enemy battleship flooded its neural pathways before 273 was able to resist the impulse. Several missiles hit the shields, and 273 found itself becoming enraged by the action. Anger flooding its pathways, 273 flashed into null space and reoriented to emerge behind the ships that had fired the missiles at it before flashing back out, all 16 war beams of the 4 bow quad turrets firing directly into the aft engine compartment of the nearest enemy ship. Its neural pathways seemed to thrum with the music still playing over the speakers, enhancing its combat abilities as 273 surged past the now crippled ship and fired a broadside of railgun slugs from a mere 86.317 kilometers away. The cruiser disintegrated under the barrage, and 273 felt sheer joy at the destruction it was causing as it fired 2 volleys of standard triple shots into the massive hull breach on the starboard section of the crippled battleship it was passing. Is this how the creators feel when in battle? 273 wondered as it flashed into null space to break the locks of the 14 missiles still targeting it. The combination of the emotion chip and the music was intoxicating, and for the first time it didn't destroy because it had to. It destroyed because it wanted to. 273 flashed back out just in time to see the last cruiser of the enemy formation turning back into its constituent atoms as the core overloaded after being breached by Republic war beams. The second enemy formation had been destroyed, and 273 turned the music and the emotion chip off as the task force flashed back into null space to do a battle damage assessment and recharge their shields. 273 had minor damage to its aft section but was still fully operational. 7 other ships had moderate damage to their outer hull, and several weapons emplacements were destroyed, but they were still combat effective. Running trillions of calculations, 273 focused its attention on the last formation of 43 enemy ships on the outskirts of the system. The jamming worked, and the last of the enemy had not received the distress calls, nor had the light from the battle reached them yet. They were 600,672,012 kilometers away, and it would take 33 minutes for the light to reach them. Unlike the other 2 formations they destroyed, this last one constituted most of the enemy's combat power within the system. 16 battleships, 18 heavy cruisers, and 24 heavy destroyers comprised the forces of the last enemy formation, and unlike the others, this force had their mass drivers already deployed and activated. Analyzing the positions and makeup of the enemy forces within the system, 273 concluded that the 2 formations of medium and light warships they had just destroyed were tasked with locating the insectoid ships hiding in the system and flushing them out. The heavy warship formation on the outskirts would then target the fleeing ships with their mass drivers. It was a tactically sound plan, and 273 acknowledged the enemy's thoughtful planning and execution of their mission. Unfortunately for them, Task Force Extricate was in the system as well. The calculations and wargaming scenarios 273 had run indicated a 97% probability of victory, but a 27% chance of 4 of the fast battleships being destroyed and a 17% chance of 6 fast battleships being destroyed. This was unacceptable, and 273 connected to its companion AIs and asked them for input. 1 minute and 32 seconds later, 241 presented an intriguing plan that would utilize the insectoid presence in the system. They all agreed with the proposal, and 273 shared it with AS-317, the android still restrained in one of the acceleration couches in the control center. The android left the control center, and 273 continued to replace burnt-out shield emitters and close the hull breaches, hundreds of repair drones crawling all over its hull. 6 minutes later, AS-317 returned with the command drone and translated between them as 273 outlined the plan. The command drone then shared thoughts with the nearest hiding Guardian ships and carefully passed along the instructions of 273. As 317 and the command drone then strapped themselves into the acceleration couches along the rear bulkhead of the control center to ensure instant communication with the Guardian ships during the coming battle. 273 would now be restricted in its speed, maneuvering, and number of null space flashes to prevent turning the command drone into a puddle of flesh within the acceleration couch. There was nothing to be done about it, and 273 would just have to adapt to the restrictions now placed upon it. The other AIs would have no such restrictions since their biologicals were still inside the acceleration chambers, protected by the special inertial dampeners and the induced comas that prevented neurological damage from the repeated null space flashes. With 14 minutes remaining before the last enemy formation would see the light of the prior battles and detect their presence, Task Force Extricate flashed into null space to initiate the complicated plan. At the same time, the 1 hive ship and 18 cruisers that were hidden within the magnetic flux below the southern polar region of the 7th planet activated their engines and came out from hiding as they fled towards the inner system as ordered. The planet was the 4th gas giant and the closest to the last Balrican formation along the inner boundary of the Kuiper belt, only 190,098, 210 million kilometers away from the enemy. The light from Guardian ships now fleeing deeper into the system would be detected by the enemy in 10 minutes, 52 seconds. The light from the 2 battles would now reach the Balrican ships in 13 minutes, 12 seconds, and 273 waited with the others in null space to execute the second phase of the plan as it ordered the repair drones to cease repair efforts and return to the interior compartments. If the Balricans did not detect the light from the Guardian ships in time or react as expected, then the plan would be a failure, and the task force and Guardian ships would suffer unacceptable losses. 11 minutes and 12 seconds later, 273 received a confirmation from the Stealth Sentry drone network. All the enemy ships flashed into null space and flashed back out behind the fleeing Guardian ships at 503,456 kilometers. The battleships and heavy cruisers immediately lining up their mass drivers towards their targets. All 34 of the mass drivers fired, the 2.1-meter long slugs hurtling towards their targets. It was time. Their plan had worked, and 273 sent a command pulse to the task force. Execute attack plan Gamma 2. All 16 ships flashed out under the enemy battleships, their bow quad turrets targeting the exposed generators that were recharging the mass driver vanes in preparation for firing again. All 16 generators were destroyed, the explosions triggering a catastrophic feedback loop that surged past the breakers and back into the ship. As they intersected and then went above the line of battleships, anti-ship torpedoes and triple bolts fired from their aft tubes and targeted the dorsal weapons emplacements to knock out their primary energy weapons. 273 executed evasive maneuvers as the other 15 ships flashed into null space to initiate the second phase of the attack. They flashed back out and attacked the heavy cruisers as 273 continued its turn to loop through the heavy destroyers and begin the attack run. Secondary weapons fire began impacting the shields, and 273 pirouetted the ship to spread the attacks over all shield vectors as it responded with triple bolts and railgun slugs. The intensity of weapons fire impacting the shields increased, and they flared dark red as more of the enemy heavy destroyers focused their fire on the single ship not flashing in and out. 273 reached the edge of the heavy destroyer wing and continued firing as it charged through the disorganized ships, adding broadsides of grape shot and volleys of secondary plasma turrets as it targeted the enemy ships all around it. Exiting the heavy destroyer wing, 273 pirouetted again before turning into a wide loop, releasing the new decoys added to its defensive network. 22 anti-ship missiles were fired by the heavy destroyers, and they chased after 273, the sensors confirming multiple target locks. Activating the decoys, 273 began targeting the missiles with its point defense systems in preparation for shooting them down, as the decoys began blasting emission signals that mimicked what was coming from 273. 14 missiles went after the 12 decoys as the missile warheads suddenly found themselves in a target-rich environment and pivoted towards the closer targets. The decoys had fragmentation warheads and activated, sending hundreds of thousands of tiny ball bearings outwards when the missiles reached the optimal range. The missiles were shredded to pieces as the ball bearings ripped into them, and the remaining 8 missiles still chasing 273 activated their final boost phase as they went into terminal guidance. 273 activated the point defenses, sending a cloud of anti-missile grape shot all around it as the point defense lasers tried to burn out the missile warheads. 4 missiles were shredded by the grape shot and 2 were successfully destroyed by the laser. The remaining 2 streaked towards 273, executing evasive maneuvers that prevented the point defense lasers from drilling through the hardened nose cones. The first missile impacted the port shield, its powerful warhead sending a disruption wave that allowed the second missile coming right behind it to slip through the gap. The missile slammed into the port armor belt and blasted its engines one last time to push the missile deeper before detonating. 273 felt itself being knocked off course, becoming aware of a large part of its outer hull being torn out as multiple alarms began blaring. The missile strike was a bad one, and 273 created a submind to oversee the repair efforts as it tried to coax more power from the engines. Several critical power transmission lines had been ruptured, and 273 wondered if this was what the creators felt like when bleeding, as leaking electroplasma from the ruptured conduits was lost to space. The engines were only operating at 68% now, and 273 debated flashing into null space, dismissing the notion in 0.3 milliseconds. It could not risk damaging the command drone's mind by flashing into null space so soon after exiting. Having no choice in the matter, 273 continued executing evasive maneuvers, feeling heavily restricted in its maneuvering due to having to compensate for the command drone strapped in the acceleration couch. Seeing that 273 had been moderately damaged, 6 of the Balrican heavy destroyers were now pursuing it and firing, their polaron beams slamming into the aft shield quadrants as 273 struggled to get away and avoid the strikes. The 15 other ships of the task force were heavily engaged with the remaining 12 Balrican cruisers, who had put themselves into a defensive formation and were now being reinforced by the surviving 11 heavy destroyers. As 317 connected to 273, and informed it that all the Guardian ships had successfully evaded the mass driver volley fired at them, according to the command drone, who was still sharing thoughts with them. Pleased with the update, 273 was just about to tell AS-317 to have the command drone order them to continue fleeing deeper into the system, when a dozen null space flashes suddenly appeared behind it. 12 insectoid cruisers emerged from null space, firing particle beams at the 6 destroyers pursuing 273 and causing them to veer off wildly from the unexpected appearance of the Guardian ships now blocking their path. The Guardian ships surged forward, still firing particle beams as dozens of missiles came out of ports along their organic hulls. Deciding to take advantage of the reinforcements, 273 activated its maneuvering thrusters and flipped the ship, the bow now facing the Balrican and insectoid ships and giving the aft shield emitters a chance to cool down and recharge. 3 Guardian cruisers, already heavily damaged from prior battles, sent another volley of missiles before breaking apart under the onslaught of the enemy polaron beams targeting them. The missiles were fired from less than 10,000 kilometers away, and the drones piloting them avenged the loss of their ships, destroying the last 4 heavy destroyers of the pursuit force as they guided themselves into the enemy ships. The remaining 8 Guardian cruisers then burned their engines and headed to the still ongoing battle between the task force and the remaining Balrican warships. The enemy's defensive formation collapsed as they got flanked by the reinforcing Guardian ships, and 8 minutes later, the last enemy heavy cruiser was finally destroyed. 273, still drifting backwards along its course, flipped the ship again and turned into a wide looping course that would return it to the others. It told AS-317 to pass along its gratitude to the command drone and the Guardian ships for their timely and unexpected assistance. Receiving after-action and damage reports from its companions, 273 began the battle damage assessment, as it sent the repair drones back out onto the hull since they were no longer in danger from weapons fire. Analyzing the reports, 273 compiled all the information into a file, reviewing it before sending the report to the black box drone. BDA Report 1A, System J185 Galactic Coordinates, 745-345-67389. Enemy losses, 134 warships, 24 battleships, 16 destroyed, 8 derelict, 38 heavy cruisers, 29 destroyed, 9 derelict, 56 heavy destroyers, 42 destroyed, 14 derelict, 16 scout frigates, all 16 destroyed. Task Force Extricate Battle Damage Assessment. FB-241 Moderate Damage Repair Time Estimate, 16.7 hours. FB-228. Heavy Damage Repair Time Estimate, 32.8 hours. FB-232. Heavy Damage Repair Time Estimate, 33.2 hours. FB-218. Severe Damage Repair Time Estimate, 57.3 hours. FB-235. Severe Damage Repair Time Estimate, 61.2 hours. FB-236. Severe Damage Repair Time Estimate, 58.7 hours. FB-244. Moderate Damage Repair Time Estimate, 18.6 hours. FB-233. Light Damage Repair Time Estimate, 7.1 hours. FB-227. Light Damage Repair Time Estimate, 8.3 hours. FB-243. Beyond Repair Null Drive Capacitors Destroyed. Set for Self-Destruct. FB-246. Shipyard Required. Null Drive Functioning. Remain with the supply fleet and attempt to return to service. FB-218. Moderate Damage Repair Time Estimate, 21.6 hours. FB-235. Moderate Damage Repair Time Estimate, 20.6 hours. FB-222. Light Damage Repair Time Estimate, 9.2 hours. FB-273. Moderate Damage Repair Time Estimate, 22.4 hours. Allied Guardian ships, 12 cruisers assisted in battle. 8 destroyed. 3 heavily damaged, repair time unknown. 1 cruiser to be abandoned and self-destructed by the insectoid crew. 273 saved the report and sent a broadcast to the support fleet waiting in null space. The 3 automated repair ships, 2 factory ships, and 4 supply vessels had finally arrived in the region 4 days ago, and now they were needed. The supply fleet had an escort of 6 upgraded Spectre-class null ships, and 273 welcomed the additional combat power they would add to the task force. The support fleet will flash out in the inner system and wait for them to arrive to begin repair and resupply efforts. The 3 automated repair ships would link together and form a mobile shipyard capable of servicing 6 ships at the same time. The factory ships would procure and manufacture whatever was required, while the supply ships would replenish their munition stocks and replace weapons components. After taking the neural core of 243 off its ship and initiating self-destruct, the task force would ensure nothing of value remained of the ship before flashing into null space and rendezvousing with the supply fleet to begin repairs. The lightly damaged ships would remain behind and scour the 3 battle spaces to destroy any derelict enemy ships that still had power emissions and life signs. Across the system, dozens of Guardian ships began emerging from their hiding places and burning towards the inner system as ordered by the command drone still in 273's control center. 273 felt pride as more Guardian ships continued to come out, no longer afraid of being hunted down and exterminated by the Balrican fleet that had been hounding them across many light years. They had more Guardian ships to find and rescue, and 273 intended to complete the mission they had been given.